All right, Paul. What about those Knicks, huh? That was something. I tell you, I was watching the game on Saturday night, and Logic said they can't do this pattern one more time, and lo and behold, they did this pattern one more time. Right? So,
Yeah, obviously, I think the Spurs have I think the youngest starting lineup in the NBA Finals history, and I think multiple times it showed up, and like anything, the you always come back to the mean. So when these guys are throwing up these threes like they're
mhm.
unconscious, that's particularly what happened in Game 4. Um, but you've mentioned it before. It's easy to be an armchair quarterback, but you got to look at the coaching, and you were dogging on Brown a little bit
Oh
there,
yeah, no, that's
but he used everybody at different times, and just he really pulled the levers, and it was and then Brunson, they got away with a few games where Brunson wasn't all there,
yeah.
but these last two games,
Wow.
they got they got the 100% Brunson.
That game five performance, that's just, I mean, 45 of their 94 points. And just for me, you know what? One of the nice things on Knicks, too, is they're old school. Most of these teams now, if they're going to go beyond 15 feet, they're shooting a three.
Right.
And the Knicks, no problem. He
Or
has that
Billy from
teardrop
BL,
shot.
from
Yeah.
those
They'll step back and take that 2-point
well,
jumper.
Brunson
They've
does
got
that
it
a
well
ton.
within their arsenal. Yeah.
Yeah, he creates that contact and then
Yep.
fades away and stuff. It was interesting years ago. So this was Brunson might have been a rookie, might have been his second year in Dallas,
Yeah, sure.
and and the Jazz had them in the first round. And actually, Jimmy was in town, so all four brothers, Scott, Jimmy, Chris had passed away by then, but Scott, Woody, Jimmy, and we all
Sure.
went to the game, and
Yeah.
that's when,
Donovan Mitchell came on the
yeah,
radar
this is
screen.
when
Yep.
Luca went
Yo,
down,
Luca and Mitchell. Yeah. Yeah.
was hurt, so we're like,
Yeah.
oh,
Exactly. Yeah.
no problem. And Brunson, we're all thinking,
Yep.
God, this rookie, or is
Yeah.
and he just ate them up,
Yeah.
single handedly destroyed them.
Well, him and Mitchell, I think that's funny because they both were on the Knicks radar screen at that
Yeah,
point.
exactly.
And they both, I think part of it, frankly, was their lack of defense at the time. It's because
Well,
they went
Mitchell
right at
doesn't
each
play
other.
defense
But
ever. You know,
that was a great series. That was one of those NBA, it was a quarter, it was a semifinal, I think. But that was a highly entertaining series. And that's really what got him the Knicks contract and led to everything,
Did I
was
hear?
that series.
With his last negotiation, he did kind of the Tom Brady thing and left
Right.
money on the table so they could build. And there's a thing as I try to call myself tongue in cheek. I was a decent athlete at one time,
Mhm.
um, nothing significant. But I
There's a
always
few
wonder.
Schulte banners hanging in that gym at Jonathan Law, right? So that's you guys had very quite
Yeah,
a career you guys had there. Yeah.
but I've always wondered, and Brady did this. How much money do you need to be
Mhm.
wealthy? So is being the top paid quarterback or the top paid point guard more important than winning championships? And you see guys, later in their career chasing championships, chasing rings. I mean, Karl Malone was a classic example of that. Who would have ever thought? I mean, Jazz fans hate the Lakers, right? Like a lot of other people. And then that's where Malone played his last season or two.
Sure.
And so it's kind of, Brunson's he's a deep guy. He's cerebral, man. He's got a
Sure.
good head on his shoulder and left some money on the table. Let them build it up. Got brought in Towns and these type of guys, and they had an ex Jazz there. Old Jordan Clarkson was on there,
Yeah.
and there's a lot of layers to this championship
Sure.
that, and what's the NBA? It's a copycat
Hmm.
league, right? So
Yeah.
you bring up a good point about everybody is in love with the threes, and if you shoot, what is it? You shoot 30% from three, you're better off than shooting 50% from two.
Exactly. I think you're exactly right. And it's funny because I think the issues, and I've heard with Brunson, I think, especially playing the long game, you think about his trajectory of his career. He's a guy I think we're going to see in basketball in some way, very active, well into the rest of our lives. Because
Yeah, well,
he's
his
going to
dad's on the
be, yeah,
staff,
yeah,
right?
yeah. I mean, he's going to become that Clyde Frazier type
Yeah.
personality. He's going to be a announcer, I definitely see him as a coach. The
Well,
personality,
like I said, he's
yeah.
incredibly cerebral. I mean, this is
Yeah,
one he is a smart
he will
dude.
be cashing checks in the league. So I don't think I think this will pay dividends in the long run. This investment. It was a lot of money left on the table, but in
Yeah,
between promotion
so in the
of
spirit of pivoting to my Yankees,
yes, yes,
they keep winning. What do they
yeah,
got?
yeah, they're back in first place, right?
Yeah, they got they got what, 3 or 4 guys. They got Stanton, they got Judge, they
Without
got
Judge.
and Grissom's out right now,
Yeah,
and Fry's out. I mean, they got like 4 or 5 starters, and
yeah,
they keep winning. But you know, Judge has got a big burden on his shoulder because if he doesn't win a
oh yeah,
championship
yep,
in his career, you know, where does he end up? Kind of the Patrick Ewing mindset. Now, for our people, for anyone watching, I'm really pulling in deep into my pockets here on the But there's so many layers here. But Judge is he started his career late. He's not young. He's early 30s, but you know. And they got Stanton and Judge. Otherwise, they just put Judge at DH. But they
yeah,
got and then Goldsmith is playing out of his mind, and so now
yeah.
when they come back, where are they going to put this guy? So
Yeah, because
Judge has got to, I
Rice has
think
practically been an MVP.
I look at Brunson and I say, okay,
Yeah,
Judge, you got to come up with the championship.
sure. Well, definitely, it's he's definitely moved himself into that pantheon. But talking about the weaknesses of the Spurs, you really get into what I think was a lot of the weaknesses of the Celtics, and really of again, it's Missoula, it's the the Spurs coach that, but they are really they're following the data right now. That this is the better way. But I tell you, when those one again, one of the things I like about the Knicks is they run an offense, and when their shooting goes cold, and they had times where it was, I mean, honestly, when their shooting went cold, I mean, there was time when
Well,
Jazz or not Jazz, the Spurs like they had 6 players on the court. It's like it was just
well, in that
it was
first half
immense.
of
Yeah,
the other night, the game 5, nobody. I mean,
yeah, yeah.
what do they have? They had less than 40 points for a half, right around there.
Oh, it was crazy. I mean, it was the
Yeah.
score that they were trending to was gonna be historically low. But the Spurs when they were playing when they're getting their defensive zone, it's like, how are the Knicks going to create any space? There was no space on the court, and they almost got to almost be a little bit dirty, I thought, in the way they attacked him. But what, the referees were in play. You got to go with it. But
Yeah.
they were really going at it, and there was times there when you were, somebody was rooting for the Knicks, you're scratching your head, going, how are they going to create the space? But every game they figured it out. And
Yeah. Well, I think they Victor, how many minutes can he play? They had him on a minute restriction during the year, and
mhm,
then they have to expand it for the playoffs.
yeah,
And he came out. He should have been. You mentioned it. We talked a little bit, throughout the game, but he got away with 2
yeah,
fragrant fouls that should. I mean, the one when he came underneath the landing space for Brunson. It's like, so Brunson was the victim of 2
yeah.
calls that didn't get called.
Sure. Well,
You know,
I think there's a really good chance if they had won game 5, and again, maybe it was fit into the NBA script to get them to win it in Madison
back in
Square.
Madison.
But I can't see with that landing space one that he wasn't going to get a post game flagrant and be suspended for game
Yeah.
6.
Well,
Because that was clearly a flagrant.
and
There's no
then
doubt.
and then all the mojo goes out of the game.
Yeah. Well, do you remember that? I was going back. I think it was 90 mid 90s. Might have been the OJ year, but the Knicks made it to the NBA Finals and they
Yes,
beat the
it
Heat.
was the OJ year.
Yeah, they beat one of they made it 2 years, and I can't remember if it was that year or not, but they
Oh,
beat
okay.
the
Yeah.
Heat in the Eastern Conference Final. And the last game, like they were both missing multiple players because of a fight at the end of the previous game,
Right. Yep.
and it was almost like the Heat players who jumped in. It's all about who is on the court, who comes in later, were better than the Knicks players who got kicked out or got suspended. So it would clearly would have been tainted by Jay. He was living with multiple lives at that point because he had clearly violated those rules about multiple flagrants. He was over way past in the zone
But
on
then,
those.
like we're the office people, the leadership of the league. But I think then that pivots back to the whole call. If you create environments that's as physical
Yep.
as the games were,
Yep.
and everybody says, talks about this, the physicality in the playoffs is another whole season.
Sure.
Um, but there may be some talk about, hey, yeah, we understand that, but let's retool this mindset, this understanding of what it is, because I think that leads to those type of plays when
Sure.
you're just getting pushed around and everything.
Well, I think the landing zone play, the rules are really good rules because that
It
was
is.
always an issue, and we
Yep.
have all played enough basketball to have twisted ankles, and it's a. I have my ankles. I describe them as permanently twisted. They just I've always got high chops. I don't ever play, but one of the things I think that is, and I'll do a knock on wood on this one because he's going to be back. Basketball is great because they're back before you know it, but
Yeah.
is Brunson's ability at his size and the way he plays to not get injured, and even including that landing zone play. I mean, his ankle came down a really grotesque manner. Clearly, could have been a. I was worried. That's one of those things. They cut the tape and the ankle pops up like a balloon, and
Right.
he's not playing Game 6 type of thing. I obviously we've seen him enough. He's living life right now. We've seen him enough not on TV that he's fine, but one of the things I think you see with him, and I think you see with a lot of these point guards, is how many times does he drive to the hoop, no foul, but he winds up on his back underneath the stanchion afterwards. That's to me, that's like when you think about guys like Derrick Rose, that they took those hits so many times, those 6 footish point guards, and he's obviously built a little more solidly than a lot of those guys. Like I think Derek Garland, how his exit from the Cavaliers got expedited because his body just took such a toll.
Well, even SGA is, these
Yeah,
guys,
yeah,
they're getting in the gym more. They're
exactly.
working out, and
His ability to take the beating he's taken over the last few years, right through these. I mean, they've played 100 games each year, the last couple of years, and he's I know, knock on wood, like I said, no injuries really to speak of. I think
and
he's
that's
been
where you
healthy.
pivot to a
Yeah,
topic another night about
yeah,
load management.
yeah, exactly.
And folks talk about load management compared to, say, the 80s, or if you want to go back to the 70s, but folks don't understand that the playoffs are a lot longer now.
Oh yeah.
Those You have an additional round that they used to not have,
Or they
and
had
the
the two
first
out of
round
three.
used to
Remember
be
that
five
back in the
games.
day?
They were 5 games, not 7 games. So
Yeah.
you're popping a good 10 to 15 more games in the playoffs.
No, definitely. It's a lot on them. They're almost. I mean, they're literally playing another quarter season.
Yeah,
And that was actually one of the interesting things too that people discounted, I think, as well, is the Knicks became the first team to win the in-season tournament and the postseason tournament. And and they're saying, now you're starting to look at that in-season tournament a little differently. That maybe it is starting to become a bellwether of how these teams are going to play when it matters.
yeah,
And I always kind of think of some guys, especially when you go to like high school, college, they're tournament guys.
yeah.
They live for tournaments. The pace. I mean, obviously the March Madness is much different than the NBA tournament and the nature of the games. But Brunson's a tournament guy.
Yeah.
He lives for that moment.
And again, I want to, as a disclaimer, that I completely do not consider myself as an exceptional athlete at any level at all. But in high school, I was second. I was a runner-up in state in wrestling.
Oh,
But it was weird, and this happened to me in college as well. I wrestled at Brigham Young University for a year. Um, I was much better when the lights were on
mhm.
than in practice. So people could be competitive with me in practice and stuff. But when I got into an actual match, again, disclaimer, I wasn't any great athlete or anything.
Well, it's second in the state at anything is a pretty great athlete.
But I was a lot better, and I tell this story again, so we're really off script here, Greg.
Yeah,
But
no, it's all good.
my freshman year in college, I walked on at BYU. There was a great guy. He was the coach of BYU. His name was Fred Davis, legend, just wonderful guy. And I didn't know any better. And I said, "Oh, I'll walk on." And BYU was, always in the top
Oh,
20 then. But anyways, I worked out and I came in the first day. I was number 9 in the depth chart. By the time it get to January stuff, I'm number 3. So I worked ahead. And there was this guy that was ahead of me that was a senior because they had all Americans all over the place, and he just throttled me in practice. Just beat the heck out of me. So Rick's college, which is another LDS, was a junior college that had athletics. They don't have it anymore. They came down and wrestled this guy.
Scott went to Rick's, right?
Yeah, Scott went to
Yeah,
Rick's. He ran at Rick's,
yeah.
and the guy from Rick's just throttled the guy that throttles me. Well, he gets hurt, and a few weeks later, coach calls me up at night and says, "Hey, look, it's so and so can't go. Can you get to weight?" I didn't tell him I was like 10 pounds over, but notwithstanding. So I drive, I go up to Rick's that day, and the kid that throttles the guy ahead of me is who I'm wrestling. And I'm like, oh my goodness,
Yeah.
what's going to happen? But I ended up losing to him by a point at the very end. And so now making the connection for everybody, me telling my one glorious
No, it's
story
all good.
is that, like you said, there's certain guys. And here's where Wemby's going to have it. Is he one of those guys that's going to, rise to the tournament, the big game guy? And there's certain players, the Reggie Jacksons and these type of people that were, big game players, or, and again, that gets back to Judge. He'll be if he doesn't win a championship, he'll be remembered for dropping a fly ball in center field.
Yeah, no, definitely. He's no, I think it's in the American League this year, frankly, is playing out very nicely for them.
Yeah.
If I mean, I think you really, I mean, I give Tampa Bay all the credit in the world for everything they do,
They're
but
amazing.
man, they don't have the horses. They get again, short series, anything can happen, but short series also now more and more in baseball becoming, if you can hit home runs, big difference maker in a short series, because you're not going to scratch as many people on with walks and stuff when you start facing great pitching staffs. Now, I kind of said it going into this postseason, and I've always had a lot of respect for Cashman, the way he conducts his business. I think he doesn't, he doesn't, I don't think he sweats, he doesn't panic, but I thought this year was the right year to stay, hold your
Bring
hand.
it
I mean,
back.
he was bringing the best pitcher that was going to be traded this offseason into when Cole coming back. He had a team that was just a few outs away from probably being against the Dodgers, but I think they obviously have some moves, and I'm sure they'll want to add some bullpen depth, et cetera, as they get into the trading deadline here. But I think they're I think this American League this year is really playing. I mean, it is as weak a league as I've seen in a long time.
And as a parting gift and a
Yeah,
segue, maybe this, because we really kind of
sure.
dived in today,
Yeah,
is the only game we lost
yeah.
was the game that our leader of the free world showed up to.
Exactly. Yes.
Now, hey,
But
you're military, protocol,
yeah,
party no flag protocol. I want to ask a question. This is another dive.
yeah,
I think we're
sure.
way off topic tonight, but that's
Yeah,
okay.
that's all good.
All right. Civilian in civilian clothes saluting the flag.
Yep.
Is that appropriate? And
My
I
understanding,
always thought
no,
it
we
was.
even as a soldier, you're told you stand at attention, hand over heart, but it's not appropriate for him, and frankly, it's an awful salute too. It's like
Yeah.
again, it was a few days of my life, but man, it gets ingrained. But you spend their first and it's actually coming up on a few weeks for these new kids are about to get beat up. You go to West Point on July 1st. It's only for me. I think I graduated from high school on June 24th, so it was a week after.
Yeah.
And they have a thing called R Day, and they pound it into you. But one of the things is they teach you the very good close salute, and his hand was like this,
Yeah.
and it's kind of like it's one of those things. With West Pointers, they take a lot of pride in that one when you see a good salute, etc. So that was the thing I thought of it. But he just, I mean, it's the thing is, he's gonna. I think when we're gonna start to see it now too, like how's he gonna try to inject himself in the World Cup? How's he, and again, we talked about it. We'll talk more about it in a couple weeks. The United States looked so good the other night. I think there's legs to this because frankly, I think their next two games. It'll be interesting this match on Friday against Australia because they did pound Turkey pretty good. But I think it's because both Australia and Turkey might not be that great. But they might sail into the knockout stage, and he's going to show up. We probably already can make some predictions. I could look it up what who they're going to play in the first knockout round, but he's going to keep interjecting himself. I mean, people online are like, oh, the Knicks turned down the invites. Like the Knicks, Dolan is not letting him turn down the invite. He's going to continue to inject himself into the Knicks, and he's going to be everywhere. But yeah. So he's got. I've done a lot of. We talked a little bit about it. I've done a lot of research on his family, and to me, it's a kind of an interesting financial puzzle. In terms of, his father was no better person than he was, but man, he was a great businessman. And Trump is just a horrendous person and a horrendous businessman. And the idea of how much he's failed, it's almost like you literally, I've thought about listening to some of his books, keeping a spreadsheet as I'm going to try to figure out, just how much he's failed. So it's a matter of him being, he's toxic at everything he does. So there was one of those books, Everything He Touches Dies. And Bill Kristol actually had a great quote. I actually had it I called up on my phone. And Bill Kristol, I don't know if you've followed him over the years, but it's funny. It's funny because he's a guy who is when the the first Bush White House. I'm going to get my numbers straight here, but the Bush 42, Bush 41 White House. He was Quayle's chief of staff. And again, we laugh when we think Quayle, but people considered him the smartest man in Washington at the time. And obviously, to be Quayle's chief of staff took the smartest man in Washington to get him to where he was. But this quote was great, I thought. And he's now I think he's actually he became a Democrat. He obviously, most of these are the Lincoln Project guys, or these guys all kind of take the step to being an independent, but he's kind of become a Democrat now, which if you told somebody 35 years ago, they said you're just crazy. But he said the UFC event captures something about this moment in our history. After all, it's vulgar, it's violent, it's commercial, it's grandiose, it's tacky, and it dishonors a place once thought worthy of care and respect. In other words, it's Donald Trump. So I thought that was just a great quote. And as a segue, we're talking in your case about a very honorable and great sport, college wrestling, and you then take the, sort of cousin or sport connected in name only professional wrestling, which is, obviously God bless them. It's borderline entertainment. People watch it as a sport. I kind of scratch my head. And then you get to, let's say the similarities. I mean, you think of boxing similar to college wrestling, and now you got the UFC. And, I had people on my Facebook feed who were, oh my God, look at that knockout in UFC. I'm like, it's all fake. Who cares? Like this, it's like, I mean, these guys are incredible shape.
You have to be in great shape.
Yeah,
to do it. I mean, it's you have to respect the conditioning.
Yeah, exactly.
You have to respect the skill to act. To feign. I don't know if you remember back, with Rocky, and they actually did specials on how they staged the fight scenes. Well, very similar. It takes a lot of skill, but it's not an athletic competition.
No, exactly. And Dana White just seems. I mean, again, he probably have his people here kill us anytime it feels like, but he seems as crooked as the day is long. And I mean, again, Boston area guy. I think
Dana White is distancing. I can't remember the fighter's name. The one that said that Michelle Obama was. That's how bad that was. He distanced himself from that statement.
And they're so, it's so like they said, that's so just weird that his birthday's on June 14th, and June 14th, obviously Flag Day.
Right.
And Flag Day is, it's also it's the birthday of the Army too, on top of everything else.
Right. Well, that's why he had his parade last year.
Exactly. And
that no one attended.
And exactly, and everybody, but in this day, that Trump is, God bless him. It's aligned up perfectly. They're thinking about Obama. They can never not think about Obama, even on this. So they call it Obama Appreciation Day.
He lives rent free in his Trump's
crazy.
head. But it was interesting. I think it was last year, right? Being a veteran like yourself, is that. From my understanding, again, I always look to you because you know what the protocol is, but it was pretty casual what is the word I'm looking for? But casual protocol during the parade. They were
Oh yeah,
pretty low key and
yeah,
not really marching at attention and stuff. It was a pretty
yeah.
interesting expedition last year.
It was funny. I got back when I just a sidebar. I got back from Desert Storm, and we had some parades and in the valley, and I think I was the only officer in the group. So and again, I am, you'd never want to hear me sing. I think people picked up on it on some of my Springsteen Facebook things, but I'm completely tone deaf. And a lot of people would say it's probably why I'm a Springsteen fan, but so I am not good. I have to work to march, and most people it's just the rhythm of their heart, and they go.
Right.
And I'll never. It's same with dancing kind of thing with me. But I so we're trying. I'm trying to get the soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines that are part of the thing. I'm trying to get them to march, and they don't want to march. So the soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, as a rule, do not want to march, and but I'm like, well, this is to me, it's impressive to see
Yeah.
people that the discipline makes. So I remember having to kind of because I don't think of myself if I make these guys march. And then I'm going to start being offbeat. They're going to go, "What is this idiot doing?" And it doesn't take very long for an enlisted person to lose respect for an officer if they can see they don't bring the goods. But no, I think so I think that I think it's going to lead into our next conversations here. But the desecration, and again, I think it was like you said with the parade. I think people cared so little, and between the rain and everything else. I mean, I figured it would get into my consciousness last night. It didn't even come anywhere near my radar screen. Like I mean, I just read stuff that people were talking about. So I think it didn't. It's almost like it didn't have the ability to desecrate the White House as much as it could have because it became such a nothing burger. But I think Dana White said it cost like $60 million in the red to put this thing on, and it seems like it's going to be our taxpayers going to be $60 in the red because I think he's smart enough to write an agreement that he's not going to pay for it.
Right. I
So
would agree. I would
yeah.
agree.
Um, but I think that whole thing about desecrate, and again, to get back to the Bill Crystal quote here, the whole thing about desecrating our institutions, and I think to me this draws and what we saw last night, it draws a direct line to how much and I'm going to think about Charlottesville here as well. And I mean, truthfully, you can almost go back to how the KKK got founded, but how they've desecrated the Christian religion and made it into something. And I don't any denomination and really any religion, but obviously, what we think of as our home religion, and just really using every slight word they can to their advantage to somehow twist into something that it isn't. And I think Pope Leo is obviously this is an area where he's jumped in on about what is really morally right.
Well, it's interesting too because we've mentioned last week the the classification of religions by the Pentagon,
Sure.
um, which kind of paints the real colors of what what the genesis is, right, for this movement. It's the white nationalism, uh, evangelicals, and I know there's lots of folks that are honest in their faith and stuff. So I hate to paint it with a broad brush, but that's kind of where we're at. But it changed. But here's the thing that the news kind of kept out is what they did is they got rid of the classification. So they didn't come back and call the Mormons Christians. They just didn't call them anything. They got rid of all the classifications. So it's kind of like you really didn't win the. I would like to have been a fly on the wall about the behind the scene conversations because I'm still convinced after seeing how they reclassified or retooled the list. They didn't put Christian next to the Mormon faith. They just took the classifications completely off the document. So that's not, so from some of my friends that are LDS and things like that, the narrative that, they reclassified is not accurate. They just took it off. So,
Unclassified.
so they got everybody, they got everybody happy. So, we're not Christians anymore, but the evangelicals are happy now because they never did call the Mormons Christian. It's intriguing what went on, but that's just a nuance that probably for a lot of folks just kind of went by.
When I think it's back to again, they just to put a pin in that is for a second here, it gets back to what you talked about before. It's a lack of respect for people. When I kind of, again, obviously being a veteran takes on a lot of different flavors, and I never saw anything like, a lot, especially over the last 25 years, what a lot of these young men and women saw. But you think about, to me, I go to the Saving Private Ryan at the beginning. I always kind of, to me, that first 15 minutes of that movie, that's, you want to scare a kid and not join the military. It's a pretty good way to do it. But it's, you have the chaplains on the beachhead, praying over the kids or whatever, and giving somebody, because this all goes to giving somebody at that moment, when they've paid the ultimate price, and they're, again, some churches believe in last rites, others don't, but giving them that, sort of peace and solitude of being able to die with their own respect and honor. To me, that's what this goes to. I mean, more than anything else, I mean, it probably has ramifications to, do they hold services on posts and bases and stuff, but it ultimately is about, them being able to practice their religion at the moment. I love, and pop culture references. I love it. There's a movie, I'm gonna draw a blank on the movie, but it's a Vietnam movie with Michael J. Fox,
Okay.
back when he was healthier, and he's like sort of in Vietnam. He's one of these guys calling out for all the problems, and he goes, and I'm gonna paraphrase it, but he basically says, when we're this close to death, people are using it as an excuse to do whatever they want. Maybe this is when we should be really good. It's because
Yeah.
and I think that, to me, that's where my mind goes when I start thinking about religion in the military, is this is sacred, and again, and I think, it's all about respecting a person's personal beliefs, and obviously this becomes the string to not, to somehow not recognize, Muslims, which, billions of Muslims around the world, and who knows any day of the week how they feel about Jewish people, because obviously they go back and forth on that constantly. But it should be about that person who is making that sacrifice to their country, and frankly, that's what they're doing it for, is so we can have freedom of religion, amongst many other things. And they should have that solitude to be able to practice religion they want at that moment. And it's just, to me, it's disgraceful. It
Yeah, and
just fits in everything else with them.
right. It's interesting. I don't know if on Netflix it's gonna. I can't handle. I just love all the history, and so I just they have all the documents. So they went through
Yep.
Washington. I just finished up Jefferson,
Yep.
and Jefferson is interesting in so many ways, right? Because of different backgrounds. Wrote the Declaration of Independence, but
Sure.
his relationships and stuff. But folks like to invoke the founding fathers as this was a Christian nation, and Jefferson, uh-uh,
Yeah.
no way. He was very much, not really very religious at all. It
Yep.
actually started the University of Virginia,
Mhm.
so there would be because back in that time, most of the universities were founded off of a faith-based foundation. He started the University of Virginia just not to have, or to have a higher education, or institution of higher learning that wasn't founded on faith.
Yeah.
So it's interesting how that narrative becomes predominant. Um, even and you've talked about I'm going to do a little plug for John Meekum. I started this one. I
Oh,
don't know
he's
if you've read
he's
this one.
great.
Have you read this one?
No, we're losing a little bit on the screen, but he's
Okay,
great. He's great.
it's the soul of America. It's one
Yeah.
of his newer ones. And
Okay.
during the introduction, um, he's basically going through the history of the United States and talks about our the battle for our better angels is a subtitle, and he talks
Sure.
about critical components.
Yep.
But during the introduction, he mentions Charlottesville,
Yeah.
and talks about that was one of the examples of when we didn't have a good leader, and and
Yeah.
didn't appeal to our better.
Sure. Well, I think it's funny. With Meacham is an interesting character. I think he's brilliant. I love his insight. Him and Beschloss. I think these historians right now are playing a lot of the role the press should be playing. In
Yeah,
terms of giving us context. And I think Meacham's story is especially interesting. He was the speaker at our second went to Wake Forest, and he was the speaker there for graduation in May of 2017. They've got a beautiful campus, and they were in they do their graduation among like it's almost like a park-like setting. People are shaded underneath the trees and all, and it's a big crowd. And he so it's 2017. Trump had just a few months in office at that point, and he wasn't a big MSNBC person at that point. Somebody who you kind of see, and I think he's playing it down the middle now, but he's calling balls and strikes as he sees them. But he was being very careful. And you can imagine Wake Forest University in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, get an interesting mix of people there. You had obviously some people who I'd say good critical thinkers, but then you're in the in a fairly deep, solid southern roots. So you're in North Carolina, but definitely people who are seeing the world through that lens. So he was very careful in his words that day. I was almost disappointed. Again, it would not be today, I'm sure, if he gave that same speech. And I think it was the time, the evolution of where we come from. But I think he was disappointed. I was waiting for him to really yell at Trump, and he at that point did not have the history of doing that, so was not shocking. But I think it's a really good point. I think again you're talking about Jefferson, and I think tying back the documentaries I've watched. I was actually rewatching one today about Grant is really important because he ran that road and he walked the walk. I mean, Grant was almost a poor man who turned his slave in that his in-laws had given him, and again, it obviously might be embellished in the documentary, but they go into it that the guy saying, you could fetch a good price for this slave, and he's like, no, it's like, and if Grant was not in a position, but I think you're kind of intersecting religion to the political piece. I think you go back to how really if you're thinking about Charlottesville. I love that it landed us right in Charlottesville, Virginia, because obviously that's where we have one of our latest examples of this movement. But it really starts with the way when Black Americans were emancipated, or the slaves were emancipated, I should say. You had a lot of our institutions and were used to, in a sense, become a quasi slave state, and you got the KKK using religion as it was founded as trying to legitimize the the racist movement, however you want to call it. And I think today, I think that's exactly where they're at. They're trying to, and I don't think they say it in so many words, but they try to twist it. Oh, they do say it in so many words, but they twist it that religion is okay with racism slash slavery slash all of it. And you almost have to, after you get your head spun around by them, go, what the hell's going on here? And I think that's that's really where you got white nationalism from, and Christo nationalism is people who have really drunk the Kool-Aid. I think you brought it up well, that they're that I mean, I think evangelical people who believe in evangelicalism, they're there because they want to be good people. But I think they've gotten twisted into what the compromises they're willing to make in order to be where they want to go. That at some point the ends does not justify the means, and I think they're way past that line.
Yeah, I think I think you bring up a good point now, and I know you're going to know this off the top of my head, but my brain's a little vapor locked. Who is the gentleman that's running for the Senate in Tennessee? Excuse me, in Texas.
In Texas, oh, it's a Tallarico. Tallarico.
Yeah, Tallarico.
Yeah.
And that's his whole campaign is what was Jesus, and I think you mentioned his message, and most of the time folks are pivoting to the Old Testament, not necessarily the New Testament.
Yeah.
And Pope Leo, really intriguing. You got this American from Chicago.
And Villanova's having a good year.
Right. And exactly. And he's not cutting any punches. He's laying, and he's, in a just the perfect position to do that because, the Vatican's its own state. But he, references Matthew 25:35 all the time. For I was hungered and you gave me meat. I was thirsty and you gave me drink. I was a stranger and you took me in. And I'm saying, and then all that does is leaves you and I just scratching our head and saying, so what happened to this Christianity? Where did this expedite? And I always say, and this would be another episode, but I am so tired of the issue with immigration. Is I don't want enforcement, and I'm kind of tired with everybody. I want some solutions.
Yeah,
I want the next candidate to come up and say this is what, even if you can't move the needle, saying this is what we should do. And I've mentioned it to you before. The statistically speaking, the vast majority of folks that are here are law abiding,
yeah,
much more so than the citizens. So let's just, and I was reading in that book again, and they made it different. I mean, the themes are just repeat. Nothing's new, but
yeah,
let's make it a much more um, easier way for folks to become citizens.
exactly.
And if you're going to keep the law, and you're doing jobs that the general population doesn't want to do, and so then I pivot and say something that's probably not appropriate. But no matter which way I try to turn and look at it, and what lens I look through this, it's based on racism. It just has to be.
Well,
There's no
definitely.
logic behind what we're doing.
Yeah, there's no economic argument that has
Yes.
any validity that we don't want. I mean, we are a country that has always grown, and I love the Springsteen lines that we the hands that built America were always trying to kick out in American land. And it's true. It's not the first time we've been through this, but there's an interesting model. And I love the Voltaire line that civilizations have, I think it's hardened boots on the way up there
Yeah.
when they're developing, and silken slippers on the way down they get soft. And I think we are now the soft civilization. Part of that model is the youth. So if you look at these younger countries, especially in the I thought there's a really interesting analogy I heard around the time 9/11, how the world right now is an east-west, it's north-south. All the wealth is in the north part of the world, all the poverty is in the southern part of the world. But when you think about where we're the population trees, you think about it, if you have a good young population, your tree's like a pyramid where you're not supporting that much of an elder class, and you got young people who are really productive in your labor force. The United States now is as it we probably predicted this 100 years ago. It's more like a bush now, where it's like almost like an oval, and that's not really a great place to be, because now and again, we're going to see this with the donut hole and Social Security. And again, it's crazy to read people online who think somehow there's this Social Security trust out there. There's a few
Oh,
dollars, but basically what goes in every month goes out every month, and
yeah.
soon that what goes in every month isn't going to be enough, and we're going to have the political will to
Yeah. And if
figure
you
it
hadn't
out.
dipped into it for X amount of
Exactly.
years, it
Well,
would be
they sold the trust out under
right.
Reagan, so
Yeah,
there
it would have
was a
been.
trust, not anymore, because they wanted it paid on
It's like
deficits.
some of us that want
Yeah,
to pull out of our retirement when
yeah,
we're 60.
yeah.
That doesn't work too well.
Yeah, exactly. No, and so the way you solve that bush is you basically artificially put wings on it with immigration. You
Yeah,
bring
exactly.
immigration in. It's a way a lot of countries have, especially. And what you then do is and again, the fact that these immigrants are sort of basically almost used as quasi slave labor is not necessarily right, but they have made the decision to come over here, and it's better for them. And you can understand when you see what they make in their own countries and them sending checks back. But it now allows the children of American citizens. I don't want to sound racist or ethnocentric here. It allows them to be at the higher, almost built-in higher level. Like they're now at a level of the educated class. Although I think education in this country, probably a whole nother episode on what is the
Right.
true value of a college education in 2026. But it's a great model for the country. It is a perfect model for where we're at. But again, it's like everything else in the Trump world. Like they don't have to have any logic or any data in what they do in it. What is the
Yeah,
data-driven world? You know?
because you're accurate and I think morally sound for feeling, yeah, well, maybe we don't want to take advantage of these folks. But if you pivot at the same time and say, okay, but here, let's just use 5 years for the sake of conversation. Here's a 5 year path. You do this. You're a good employer. You're paying your taxes. You don't have any issues. No criminal issues and stuff. And in 5 years, you become a citizen. So and then it expands even further because that lower tier paying into the system will continue to grow. And so the piece that I would add to what you said is, and then we just make a fast track. Here's a way to become a citizen, and then the folks that are the bad guys, they'll try to do it, and then they'll do something naughty, or they just will try not to be registered.
When I think for the most part too is like I always thought it was funny this whole notion that immigrants are crossing, the Rio Grande, doing, things that honestly, we want to talk about Republicans talk about pulling off your bootstraps. None of us have the intestinal fortitude to pull our bootstraps up like these people have. They get
Right.
into this country, and then they're like, and the first thing they're going to do, they're going to go expose themselves to the ballot box and cheat as voters. Like, yeah, I don't think that's what they went through all that for. I mean, frankly, they may not like Trump. They don't care enough about any of it. They're here for economic survival. So yeah, it's not the first thing to do them, but it's the same thing. If somebody has gone through all that, they come here. What I mean, again, there in any population, you have a certain amount of good and bad. They're coming here to commit crimes. They're going to go through all that just to come here and commit crime. I mean, it's insanity. I mean, again, they're people. I think for the most part, again, it's probably being a stereotyping. They want to live in the shadows and do their thing that they're trying to do so they can create a better life for their family. But they're not looking to come here, put up a big flag, and say, "Hey, here I am. Come find me." It's not the nature. It's never been the nature of our immigrant class. Our immigrant class comes here. They do the hard work and ultimately they're paying it forward for their future generations. And it's no different. And I tell you, I've been in some pretty funny arguments. I won't go into the people or the nationalities where you try to point out to people that it's no different than when their families came over here.
Well, that's what I was just
Better
about
life
to
for them.
interject, is that the patterns remain the same, whether it was the Irish, whether it was the German, and the Schultes came through Newark.
Yep.
In the mid
I did not
1800s.
know that. I did not know
Yeah,
that.
oh yeah. So we can take a deep dive on that. I know their family
Well, now
history.
Newark being such the center of things at the moment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Schultes came through Newark,
Yeah.
but and then my mom was Irish, and I'm like, okay, so I go back in my family history, and
Yeah.
we weren't really. I don't have a history of folks coming from with open arms. People weren't real
Oh,
welcoming,
sure. I know.
and we just continue the same pattern because the language and the discussions are incredibly the same as they were.
Well, it's amazing too when you think about what Boston is today,
Yeah.
and you think about the way the Irish treated when they came to Boston, or treated when
Well,
they came to Boston, and
exactly.
it's just and meanwhile it's the identity of the city today. But and again it is also again as we walk through this, it's a logical why people want to push down people, like I said, who I think have probably done. You think about what you had to do to pass a citizenship test. These people are probably more American valued than the vast majority of us. Like they live and breathe what this country is founded on. And again, it's so disheartening that our weapon of choice almost against them has been, is trying to be religion constantly, and to the whole concept in Charlottesville again of you can't replace us, and again,
Yep.
it's not replacement. It's basically you're elevating us by putting and I always use the concept of a if you're going to build a pyramid, think about a human pyramid. Do you start by putting more people on the top? No, you put more people on the bottom. And then
Yeah.
the pyramid becomes wider and bigger and stronger, and it gives us all opportunities to move up that pyramid. And I just don't understand. I don't see it. And I think they use religion as a weapon to try to justify the immoral by try to cleansing it, making it
Yeah,
moral.
which
You
goes
know?
back to
Yep.
the golden rule, the
Oh, yeah.
Sermon on the Mount, all these things that
Yep.
Christ taught. The disconnect is just leaves you scratching your head. You're like, why? How did this become? I always chuckle to an unrelated note, but still funny, is when Trump got asked what his favorite verse in the Bible is. Okay, you cannot read the Bible your whole life, and you got to have one verse off
Yeah,
the
I
top
got
of your
something.
head.
Yeah,
You got to have something.
sure.
And it was I just like it all, And it's like, oh my goodness, who's his handlers? Of course, he's so beyond handlers, it doesn't matter. But to not have a verse
Oh, yeah.
on the top of your head is just. I don't care if you know that. if you don't know the reference, but just say, "Oh, the golden rule. I love the golden rule." It's just
Ah,
it's very intriguing. But
and,
here's the results.
and it would be a great shortcut for him to justify, like almost like I'm almost thinking like the mobster, which is obviously a great parallel for him. The mobster who does all the awful things all week, but he goes to church on Sunday. He's a
Yeah,
great guy, right? It would be such a great shortcut for him to be, yeah, he does the most insane, immoral things. But hey, he's a guy who can quote a Bible verse, or he's a guy who shows up to church every Sunday. He can't even do that. He can't even play a little bit of the part that would make it so easy for him.
yeah, that's where Biden kind of
Yep.
kind of he was a Catholic.
Yep.
He went to church all the time. I shouldn't say he was a Catholic. He is a Catholic,
Yep.
and he went to church all the time, and he handled the abortion thing, just saying, "Look, I'm not necessarily for abortion, but I don't believe that we should impose on women's rights, and that's a personal decision." So there's a good example of how you do navigate something
Yep.
about the religious perspective, but still being able to embrace that more progressive. Not that the last thing Biden ever was a progressive. He was very centrist,
Yep.
but that's a good example of how to handle the religious narrative, and with it, what I would consider could have been pretty. I'm a Catholic, but I'm going to support someone's right to get an abortion.
Well, I
At
think
10,000 feet, that would seem kind of
And I,
ironic.
and I think as a leader, again, it gets dicey when you're a leader of a nation that is sometimes like, you think about, Reagan or Clinton, the healer in chief kind of role. So
Mhm.
the moral part is important, but I think it's also as a leader, there's no written rule that says everything you believe in your personal life has to be part of your public life. And I think that's where Biden found a sweet spot there. And I think it was really disgraceful when you had these bishops, etc.,
Oh,
who wouldn't give him communion. Because again, I think you could say what you want about Biden. And again, I feel like one of the proudest things I did in my life was work on that Biden campaign. But frankly, it's hard to talk about now because of the way it all turned out. But he was a good man. He is a good man.
oh,
He's
absolutely.
a good man. And he's flawed. He's not perfect, and that's part of what made him, I think, very people grab to him. But he you're right. He did find that way of doing it, and I think I think the religious beliefs. I think there's a time and a place for this country having people who are morally grounded. But I think that morally grounded can take on a lot of different. I mean, you look at Mondani, and he's just
Oh,
he's just a good person. I could
yeah,
care less about what religion he is. He's
yeah,
just such a good person. He gets it, and I think New York. I think New York's going again. Let's tie it back. We'll
yeah,
end where we started, but New York's going to go through a revitalization. I think that I didn't feel like New York was right for a long time, ever since 9/11, really. And I think between the Knicks, between the spirit he's brought to the city, I haven't spent as much time there recently. My current role isn't in the city, but I just think it's amazing what he's doing and the way the city's going. I'm just really excited for it. But he's a perfect example. Who cares what religion he is? He's
yeah.
just a terrific person. And
I agree.
yeah,
Well,
no,
good.
it's not. But I think, Paul, I think I do think I think the lessons learned from the Knicks about the moment in time we're at is sort of that stick to itiveness. I mean, and I love to use I was going to bring it up earlier, but I think a lot of the problem we've been trying to tackle lately with how do Democrats come up with a solution to fix this? I like to use the idea of the Apollo 13 model that you've got a impossible goal, and then this gets me back to almost like some of the stuff I used to see with the Patriots offense in some of these games is 100 things in a row have to go right in order to reach it. And you start off by the first one, and then you go to the second one, the third one. And I think that's what I think the Knicks did so well, is they didn't lose focus on the 100 things they had to do right to come back in these games. And I think it's what as a country we have to do well, because I don't think this is going to be easy, but we can't lose our attention at the second or third step because we have 97 more to go. You know what I mean?
And I think as we talk, visit in the future is And it's obviously we're going to get energized as we pivot towards the midterms and whatnot. But my feeling is, and New York has demonstrated this, right? I think they've shown that the model can be really progressive, really successful, and I think nationally and everything, um, that's got to be the talk going forward. It's got to be, you know, the hell with this middle stuff. Let's call it who we are. And you know how I feel.
Yep.
My feelings about universal health care is really passionate because I worry about my children and my grandchildren. And I just think he's shown that you can run the campaign like that. He's delivered on it, and quickly. Um, and that's where I think we've got to go in. You talk about 100 steps. I think it's 100 steps to saying getting kind of throwing the old playbook out
Yep.
and just saying times have changed. We got to go all in on this
Well,
really progressive mindset.
I think part of it is doing the hard work, right?
Yeah,
People are like, well, we could get 80% of the way there by staying with what we've done in the past just because we're not the bad guys.
right.
Um, but the 80% of the way there doesn't give us, it's amazing we're even in the Senate conversation, but doesn't give us the Senate, or it puts, John Fetterman is the most important person in the country, God help us. And but to really change this country in a way that's gonna, grab especially the youth voters, it's going to take hard work, and it's going to take doing 100 steps. And I got to say, I've fallen in the camp over the years that, well, we don't know if we're going to do the 100 steps because we got to get a lot of people on board.
Yeah,
We know we can do we know we can do the easy way and get to the 80%. And I think, but I do think you look at people, like Calorico, like Bashar, and then we talked to a few weeks ago, who've been able to add hey, let's reach out to the Christian element of the country in a positive way, but grab that piece of them. What did they start wanting to do? And I think that could be a really powerful message incorporated with. And again, that's not going to be. It would never have been the message in New York City, but
no,
it can be a regionalized message of. But it's still the same thing. And you brought it up tonight, I think perfectly, the golden rule, and that's what I think this all comes down to. And you brought up your children, and that's, I think we all want, we want to secure our children's future, but we want to do it in a way that secures everybody's children's future, not
exactly.
just let's continue the old rules because we're white men, and if we're white men, we secure our white children's future.
Yeah,
That's not what we want. I think that's not. First of all, I think with the way families are being built today and all, that's not really a viable model to begin with. And I think it's got to be a future about really making it the country we're supposed to be for everybody. And that's, I think, the opportunity we have as we head in the next 5 months here.
all right. Well, we've got some steps to take as we visit the next few months.
Yes, Paul, thank you very much. I think we'll have Karen back next week, hopefully. But thank you, and I hope let's see if the Yankees can keep this up and keep this.
Amazing.
We got quite the summer wave going here with. And we'll have to talk about the World Cup team soon too. But really good stuff. Thank you,
Okay.
Paul.
Thanks, man.